All right, I think we are going to get ready to rock and roll. Thank you all for joining us tonight to our Silvopasture webinar. Tonight we're going to be hosted by me, Katie, and Paul. We're going to be joined by Mark Batcheler. Yeah, I hope you all are doing great. Uh, First, we just wanted to give a brief land acknowledgement. So the Pierce County includes 1,806 square miles of ceded lands of our four federally recognized tribes, the Puyallup tribe, the Nisqually tribe, the Muckleshoot tribe, and the Squaxin Island tribe. These tribes are sovereign governments that predate the founding of the United States, and their sovereignty is an inherent right that has existed since time immemorial, recognized with the government-to-government relationship by the United States. We recognize that the traditional and current homelands of these tribes and their territorial lands, waters, and airs are contiguous and transcend U.S. government-established boundaries. This means that the quality and abundance of the county's natural resources directly affects the quality and abundance of natural resources of tribal nations. So what are conservation districts? Pierce Conservation District, or PCD, is a local government agency that works with organizations and private citizens in a voluntary, non-regulatory capacity to promote sustainable agriculture, improve water quality, create natural, thriving habitats, build a just and healthy food system. And PCD's conservation efforts are focused on watersheds located within our boundaries of member jurisdiction to affect region-wide environmental improvements through education, community engagement, and financial and technical assistance. To learn more about how you can make a lasting impact on climate resiliency within your community, feel free to visit our website, which is www.piercecd.org, or we have also a video to include as well. Overall, PCD works with the community members and organizations to promote natural resources, and stewardship through voluntary participation, technical assistance, and cost share programs. So we do stuff like tree planting, community gardens, volunteer opportunities, and we also have a native plant sale. Just a brief overview of conservation districts through their history. A combination of poor farming practices and drought led to the Dust Bowl in the 1930s. About 100 million acres of farmland were essentially blown away, and 500,000 people were left homeless, hungry, and in poverty. 3.5 million people took part in the largest migration in the United States history. And in response, conservation districts were established in all 50 states to help address the local conservation challenges. And here we have a short video just doing an overview of conservation districts that I will be playing now. Let me know if you can hear it.
That's fine.
Okay. Overall, our mission is to equitably support community-driven solutions to our most pressing local environmental challenges. In order to do so, our vision of a Pierce County with thriving ecosystems and resilient communities. Those of us in Western Washington are incredibly spoiled to have the sound mountain combination with so many essential resources, including fresh air, water, and cool green spaces. However, many of these habitats that provide important ecosystems, such as water and air purification, flood and erosion control, shade and natural cooling, are disappearing and or in decline. We can see in the past 50 years, much of the green spaces around the Puget Sound have been developed, creating an uphill battle towards achieving our goal. So many of us really enjoy being here and enjoying the healthy soil, water, and air that Washingtonians love. However, there are many factors that play into habitat degradation and increasingly pressing environmental issues, each having its own impact on others, making this exceedingly difficult to address and effectively mitigate. Efforts to minimize negative externalities. And we don't want these actions to exacerbate one another. To effectively pursue our mission and affect tangible change in Pierce County. Pierce Conservation District has 6 different programs: environmental education, which focuses on engaging students with their local environment; climate resiliency, reducing wildfire risks and helping rural communities transition to renewable energy sources; farm planning and agriculture assistance. We work with local farmers and agricultural producers to help them implement practices to improve soil and water quality, as well as crop production and livestock management. As far as Harvest Pierce County goes, Harvest Pierce County is dedicated to expanding Pierce County's community of food growers, sharers, and harvesters as they promote the belief that everyone deserves access to fresh, healthy, and affordable produce. Water quality the program is dedicated to protecting one of our most abundant natural resources, which is water, which we cannot exist without. The water quality team works to protect and improve the water quality of our local streams and rivers, whereas habitat improvement focuses on improving riparian, floodplain, and marine nearshore habitats of Pierce County, along with many other rare and endangered plant species and communities within the region. This work supports the essential ecosystem processes that make a healthy habitat. And I'll now pass it over to Paul to talk about the Farm Planning and Agriculture Assistance Program at PCD.
Thanks, Katie. Yeah, the Farm Planning and Ag Assistance is a county-wide program here at the district. We're here to offer technical assistance and recommendations on farm best management practices. We especially focus on mud, manure, pasture management, sustainable growing practices, cover cropping, promoting pollinators. We have equipment rentals, certain pieces of equipment that you can rent from PCD. We also, in certain situations, those who work with us to develop a farm plan can apply for financial assistance. All these services are free and are provided, to folks who give us a call. So tonight, we go to the next slide. Tonight, we're going to talk about silvopasture, what it is, what it isn't. This isn't a pasture talk for elderly people, Silvopasture. It's to talk about silvopasture, which is raising trees, raising livestock, and growing forage. Tonight, we have the benefit of, maybe next slide. Yes. So after tonight, if anyone is interested, there are several publications that I can forward to you that go over the basics of silvopasture, what it is. There'll be a good review of what our presenter shares with us tonight. And the last little bit of information, there's something called the Silvopastoralists Quiz. So it's a series of questions on a document to help you decide if going in this direction is something you want to do. Silvopasture is a managed program. It's not just letting your livestock out into the woods. So thank you for listening to this part. I'd like to introduce now Dr. Mark Batcheler. He's with the USDA's Forest Service. He's based in Corvalis, Oregon. He's a natural resource specialist, and he works with the National Agroforestry Center. So Mark will give us a presentation, and then we'll have time for questions.
Thanks, Paul. Thanks, Katie. All right, can you guys see my screen? All right, there we go. Well, good evening, everyone. Thank you for letting me talk at you this evening. I hope to be better than Netflix, though I don't hold me accountable to that. So as Paul mentioned, silvopasture is an agroforestry practice. Agroforestry, for those of you that are into definitions, is a USDA recognized practice that integrates crops, trees, and livestock on the same unit of land. And in the background here, this is, I know this is in Eastern Washington, don't be mad at me, but that's where my research was at as a graduate student. This is in Spokane County, near Cheney, Washington. And this is an excellent example of dryland or xeric ponderosa silvopasture pine in Washington state. So I always like to tell people where we're going before we get there. So just a brief outline. I'm going to be talking a little bit more about the definitions, characteristics, some design management, and some benefits and challenges, and a little bit more about what I call land management requirements. So to begin, again, silvopasture is the integrated intentional management of trees, forage, and livestock on the same unit of land. And this is currently one of my study sites here in Corvalis, Oregon, where white oak or Quercus garryana, for those of you that love Latin, are integrated into a rotational stocking or rotational grazing. And then the forages are managed appropriately. And I'll talk a little bit about what that means.
Mark, can you adjust your presentation for view mode so we get a larger picture?
Let's see if I can. Let me stop sharing for a second. Display settings. How are we doing there?
Hasn't come up yet.
Okay, hang on a second. Oh, I figured it out. Maybe that figured it out.
You know, it's better. We still see the slides on the side.
Try clicking the three dots that are on the, oh, I can't see your mouse.
Yeah, I see the three dots.
And then there's a way to get out of presenter view. And then unclick presenter view.
Hide presenter view. There's always a lag time. How are we doing?
Are we in slideshow?
Yep.
Okay.
We'll figure it out.
Okay. Yeah, that's better.
Is it?
I think so.
Okay. I'm gonna try one more thing. I always like to go as good as possible. I'm not sure if that helped or not. Oh, I know what it is. Sorry, I'm stupid. All right, let me see.
I think that's it.
Almost there. How are we doing there?
Oh, kind of went backwards.
Oh, it did?
It was a full screen, and then there we go.
Okay. So you guys can see my notes and my other slides, but that's okay. Are we good?
We're not seeing it anymore.
Oh. Oh, yeah.
It's showing a different window now.
Really? How about now?
You could also, that works. You could also drag your window a little bit. If you put your cursor toward the edge of your screen, go a little bit to the left. The mini showing the mini presentation window. A little bit higher. Yeah.
That didn't do it.
Yeah, maybe you could just show it not in presenter view, and then I think we'll be good.
How are we doing now?
I
No.
think it's
I'm gonna try one more thing.
okay. There we go. Oh,
Yeah. Great. I know what to do now then. Hang on just a second. Share my screen one more time. Uh-oh. Minimize. Isn't this fun?
thanks for your patience, everyone.
All right. How's that?
That looks great.
Yay! All right. Still good?
Yep.
Great. Thank you all. Technology is wonderful, and that's why we love it. I'm going to move along. So silvopasture, whenever I say silvopasture and deliberate integration of trees and management, I assume this is what you guys are thinking, which is hopefully it's not the case, because that doesn't necessarily look like a cow that's going to be happy for a long period of time. So some characteristics of silvopasture. These are the livestock management. Typically, we use the term rotational stocking or rotational grazing, and it means the cattle or livestock, whether that's goats, pigs, turkeys, chickens, or who knows, whatever else you got, are moved around on a regular basis during the growing season. And the growing season is defined when forages are growing, not necessarily trees. Forage management, we're selecting for species that meet the nutritional requirements of your livestock and are also well designed designed is not the right word, well managed for your ecosystem. So if you're on the east side, you're going to be looking for a mixture of cool and warm season grasses. For you grass nerds, those are C3, C4 grasses in a combination with some forbs. Chicory is becoming really popular, so is plantain for its own specific reasons, along with a wide variety of legumes. Perennial versus annual forages, again, depending on where you're at. And then your tree or stand management, depending on the number of trees you have in a landscape. You want to think about the composition of the species, whether you have multiple species, which ones are shade tolerant, which ones are shade intolerant, and then the structure of the trees. So, do you have a closed canopy, or do you have open spaces, gaps in your canopy? Do you have co-dominant species of trees? Do you have even age, uneven age management of the trees? And these are all nerd terms, as I call them, but we'll get through them together. So best way to do this is kind of give you a checklist or a recipe to follow that I've seen work well. For pasture to silvopasture, the steps that I've seen work well is first is get a team. I say this because very few people are orchard specialists or foragers, foresters, they're forage management specialists or livestock specialists. And that's a part of the challenge of silvopasture is it requires a high degree of speciality for a various amounts of things. Look at your site assessment. If you're in Pierce County, obviously you're probably not going to be putting in ponderosa pines or not too many of them. So selecting species that are going to do well in your area. Selecting trees that are appropriate both for the site conditions and what your goals are. Are you wanting to plant timber quality trees? Are you wanting to plant trees that produce fodder for your livestock? Are you wanting to plant trees that produce fruits and nuts, where you can integrate both fruit production, nut production, along with livestock? Also, knowing when you're gonna how you're gonna configure your trees. If you've got a blank slate, you could set up your trees in a plantation style, so rows. And again, depends on the species of how far apart those rows are and how far apart the trees are. There's ways to plant double rows or triple rows of trees as trainers, so that causes the trees to grow up straight. So a lot of complexity there. You can also think about, is this a short-term or long-term silvopasture management? For example, in this picture right here, this is in Western Washington, or sorry, Western Idaho. This is a landowner that had a pasture. She decided she wanted to put in some ponderosa pine, and she wanted to make some money off of them eventually, but it's going to take years for those ponderosas to grow up to be financially viable. So she planted the trees in rows, and she's grazing in between. And as the trees grow, she limbs them up or prunes them up. And eventually that's going to shade out the forages underneath, and she's going to remove the livestock and focus on timber management. And then finally, forages. Forages are key. Knowing which forages grow well in your region and which forages meet the requirements of your livestock. Coming back to this one in San Juan County, knowing how to grow your livestock and your trees. So here we've got our Asian pears, and you can see tree tubes in the foreground right here. And the tree tubes are eventually going to break apart, and rightfully so. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about that if I have time. In the place of the tree tubes, the landowner, and I've got a better picture of this in a second, has put single wire lines that are electrified. So again, the livestock can graze right up to the trees. They're protecting the trees and allowing livestock to graze. Here's that picture right here. So you can see my cursor right here. And if you think of a base of the tree, the lower the wires, the closer they are to the base of the tree, and the higher the wires, the further they're away from the tree. So you have this V starting at the base of the tree. And again, what that allows the livestock to do is graze right up to the tree, but not actually get access to the trunk, preventing girdling of the trees. But it uses good forage management. There is lots of technology to protect trees when establishing. So number one right here, up in the upper left-hand corner, we have a tree tube that's surrounded by, I'm from the Midwest, we call this hog fencing. It's a durable fence. It's about 4 feet high. And so the tree tube by itself, if a cow or a sheep got up right next to that and started rubbing against that tree tube, and the fiberglass pole or wood stake that's in there are going to fall over. So this landowner used the hog fencing next to it, and then they actually ran a polywire, electric wiring right next to it. Number two, this electric netting fence I think is great for smaller livestock, particularly chickens or turkeys. I have seen this used with small pigs. But it's not really appropriate for sheep, larger pig species, or livestock such as cattle. Number three is a great picture. I really like this because they have the tree tube established, and they zip tied their polywire right next to the tree tube. So if a cow comes over and tries to brush up against that, it's at their body height. They're not going to enjoy rubbing up against that tree tube because they're going to electrified. Number four right here, I always like this one because I think it's an example of what not to do. So they have a tree tube wrapped in barbed wire, and then the tree is staked inside. And those of you that have run livestock with tails, particularly cows, cow tails are really great catching barbed wire, and they would just rip that barbed wire right off and probably pull your tree right out of the ground. And when appropriate, using your live trees as part of your infrastructure for your fence. So they have a living tree right here, and then they've attached some some protectors right next to the tree, support the fence. So there's 1,000 ways to do this. And for those of you that are taking notes, there's a really great book that I'll reference at the end of my presentation. It's called Trees for Grazers. And while the book is written for the East Coast, it's got loads of fun pictures just like these that give you examples of what to do and what not to do. All right, so that is pasture to silvopasture. Now we're going to move on to forest to silvopasture, and you're going to see a little redundancy here. So gather a team, get your specialists in there. Highly suggest working with a forester, a grazing specialist, maybe a soil scientist, because you've got a system that is perennial, that being your trees. And when you thin or selectively remove those trees, it's good to be deliberate in your actions. So again, conducting a site assessment, that might be the number of trees in the landscape, species, the forages as well, what's there. Highly suggest monitoring your forages after a thinning event and before you go in there and seed, just to make sure that you're not outcompeting already some good vegetation that's there for your livestock. Determine which species you want to keep, which ones you don't. Consider the effect of the shade of the canopy. So a Douglas fir canopy is going to be denser. It's not going to let as much light down to the floor, which is where you're trying to get that light to go to, versus something like a white oak, which has a much less dense canopy. It's going to let a lot more what we call photosynthetically active radiation, or AKA sunlight, that's food for your forages. Also consider if it's toxic. Ponderosa pine and pine species in general are toxic to pregnant cows. It'll cause abortion. Prunus species have a negative impact on sheep. So just know which species you have out there, which kind of livestock you're going to have. You can consider forage improvements. Again, this can be costly. So it might be better to manage what's there rather than putting a whole bunch of seed in the ground. And considering how long you have to keep your livestock off, that's another consideration. Considering your AUMs, this is your carrying capacity of your livestock. There's some great tests out there that just require a wire hanger and a paper bag and a scale to help you determine how much forage you have per acre. WSU has some great literature on that. And then consider what percentage of your property is going to be in pasture and or silvopasture. Very few times in Oregon and Washington have I ever seen somebody's property be entirely composed of silvopasture. Usually there's a little mix, and there's reasons for that, which I'll talk about later. Some other management activities when in terms of silvopasture, I think that there's always forages out there that are toxic or not preferential, that spot spraying using an herbicide to remove them and improve the amount of forage quantity and quality that's on your landscape. When appropriate, mowing around the trees. If you have that equipment, having a brush hog or something like that to get close to your trees. Again, it's really helpful to remove some of the non-preferential forages in your landscape. Exclusion of livestock. This has variable duration. If you're just establishing your forages and you want to keep them off a growing season, using electric fences is appropriate, or permanent fences if you have that time and money to build those fences and maintain them, and funding support. Pruning trees may or may not be necessary depending on the quality of the tree. And if you have timber trees, fruit trees tend to need pruning, but this kind of pruning is usually a limbing up of the trees. For forest to silvopasture, mastication, so going in there and chipping up the woods that are on the ground, the downwoody debris is helpful, mainly to increase nutrient cycling and to increase the amount of acreage or surface area for your forages. When in doubt, something I always think is you can always grow crops where you don't have livestock. This is an example. This is in the East Coast. where they grow, they have hay in between the trees. So there's lots of opportunities, and I think the sky's the limit when it comes to silvopasture systems. There's no hard, fast rules, but there are, depending on what your goals and objectives are. Some benefits. These are well-established benefits, both in literature and experience from farmers across the U.S. Economically, you're providing yourself with some multiple revenue streams, whether that's timber, fruit, nuts, meat from your livestock. You can have short-term and long-term income sources. Short-term might be your livestock or forages or fruit tree, nuts, whatever you got. Long-term might be timber. And the benefit of having a silvopasture is it reduces economic risk. So all your eggs are not in the same basket, which is something that we can all understand these days. Ecologically, if that's something you're considering, this reduces heat stress and cold stress on livestock. The shade from the trees reduces heat stress. It also improves nutrient distribution in the way of livestock deposition, pooping on the ground. If you're moving them around, they're not all going to just poop in the same spot. They're going to, as you move them around, they tend to use the forages a little bit better and consistently. And so when you move them from paddock to paddock, those nutrients are going to get the opportunity to break down before the livestock get back in there, which reduces parasite loads as well. Increases soil health. Soil health is a catch-all term. This could be soil organic matter. It could be reduced erosion. And this is specifically in comparison to continuously grazed sites. So those sites are, when cattle or livestock are just put out in spring and allowed to graze in the same unit of land until the grass or forages just stop growing. And finally, increases biodiversity. So when I think of biodiversity, think of birds, wildlife, pollinators, things like that. If that's something you're interested in improving, using silvopasture, which uses rotational grazing, when compared to continuously grazed sites, you see higher levels of biodiversity. Always the challenges. It is complex. And I've kind of talked a little bit about this, but without proper management, you get a lot of issues. Maybe you overgraze, and it takes a while for your forages to recoup because they're competing with shade from your trees, and your livestock might have removed a lot of the residual biomass that's on the ground. Because you have trees, you have less forages being produced. So that means you need to decrease the amount of livestock in a given acre of land when compared to pasture. And what we're changing here is we have a few regional examples. So if you were a farmer and you wanted to go see another silvopasture system, sometimes it's hard to go find them because people don't necessarily advertise that. Fortunately, due to conservation districts and a few of the nonprofits in Washington State, that's changing, so they can direct you and put you in contact with some people that are early adopters of silvopasture and have excellent examples. Tax and land use programs. This is something to talk to with DNR, Department of Ecology, and your local conservation districts. Make sure you don't get yourself in a situation where you're thinning trees to the point where it's no longer considered a forest, and it's going to impact you economically. I also think it requires a high degree of skilled managers. Again, you're working with trees, forages, and livestock on the same unit of land. Quickly, some management requirements, some things that I've seen work well with land managers. They are comfortable with practicing rotational grazing or stalking. So again, these are systems where the growing season is occurring, livestock are being moved every 12 to 1 week, depending on the amount of animals in the landscape. It requires a lot of time and labor to move animals often. And having a team of foresters, grazing specialists, soil specialists is beneficial. But once you have them and hold on to them. I think the ability to adjust grazing practices, your herd size, for those of you who are in Washington, I think what was then we had that massive heat dome in 2021 or 22. I know a lot of landowners that I was working with, they had to reduce their herd size because their forage yields were really low and hay was super expensive. So that's just a component of silvopasture, but also for any land management system. I think somebody that likes to work with others and learning from others. I've seen a lot of folks that have integrated silvopasture systems. They work well with a lot of other people. And you're also skilled in monitoring your ecological data. When I was a kid, they said that the best fertilizer was the boots of the farmer or the rancher. And I still think that's true. Somebody that likes to go out and spend time in their land, look at the grass grow, monitor your soil, look at the health of your livestock, your trees, go look at birds and butterflies, and think about the health of your land. All right, so that's it. I have thousands of more slides, but I'm going to stop there and see if I can take some questions. So I'm going to stop sharing.
We have a couple questions in the chat.
Cool.
And so feel free, everyone, to either type your questions in the chat or unmute yourself once the questions have been answered. First question, what factors either increase or decrease compaction risk by especially large hoofed livestock?
That's a great question, Jim. Thanks for asking that. One of my favorite questions, actually. So knowing the carrying capacity of your land is very key. And so carrying capacity is broadly defined as the amount of forages that a mother calf or cow or sheep can be supported in a given landscape. So you look at the forages. Let's say you could have like 10 tons of grass in a landscape, and you know how many head of livestock that you're going to run on there. So knowing that formula is key. And you can figure that out yourself. There's lots of resources, or you can work with a grazing specialist, and that is key because that's going to determine how much forage utilization, so how much forage is the livestock are getting used, and then how much forage residual biomass you need to leave. So if you go in there and imagine everybody's eating all your forages, how much you're going to leave after they've chewed that down. There was an NRCS grazing specialist who just recently retired, and she used to tell me that for Western Washington, leave about 3 inches of forages after the grazing events. So there's a lot there. Also, knowing how often to move your livestock. So if you've got a lot of bare ground, if you have a steep slope, if you have a north-facing slope where there's not a lot of light getting to the landscape, or if you have a south-facing slope where you have a lot of light, but the forages senesce or die out very quickly around summertime, there's a lot of factors there. So just to sum that up, grazing, know your carrying capacity of your landscape. Know your forages and how quickly they respond to a grazing event, and how much residual biomass to leave. Look at your bare grounds. How much do you have in a given meter? If you've got 30%, you're grazing a little heavy. If you've got 5 or 0%, then you're doing good. And monitor. Whenever you can, go out there, be the boots on the ground, be the fertilizer, and use your eyes and just monitor, looking for rills, especially after good rain events. Those are all factors that I would consider.
Awesome. Thanks, Mark. Next question is, does the forage and grazing have negative or positive impact on fungus growth like chanterelles and truffles?
Oh, what a fun question. I'm a mushroom hunter, so I always like this question. So many of our forages are actually, well, it depends. So our truffles rely on the mycorrhizal fungi communities, and those are actually associated with the tree species. So our truffles in Western Washington, you can, if you know who to ask, looking for your oak woodlands are really, really great, or your hazelnuts. or filberts. I'm not sure what people call them in Western Washington. So it's a great question, and they can. Little bit more elucidation on that question, though, is the forage and grazing can affect your balance of bacterial dominant soils or fungally dominant soils. Interesting fact that if you have trees on a landscape, you tend to lean more towards fungally dominant soils. Or if you have more annual vegetation, you tend to lead towards bacterial dominant soils. So you can have chanterelles and you can have truffles in your silvopasture systems. We have a landowner down here in Oregon, and he has a white oak silvopasture system where he's grazing pigs, and he has found many a truffle on his landscape. So it is very possible. Chanterelles, not so much, but who knows? I think you could manage for that. Good question.
All right, are there any more questions for Mark?
And I know one question was, if you have a pasture and you're interested in planting trees for cattle or other grazing livestock, are there certain kinds of trees that are better to plant than others, especially if you're interested in um, the fruit and nuts that are dropping?
Good question. Um, Going back to what your goals and objectives are, if you're interested in timber quality trees or fruit producing or nut producing trees, know that first. Don't just go willy-nilly in planting trees. Then conducting a site assessment, looking at your soils, your precipitation. Think about if you've got areas like down in Snohomish County, there's a great silvopasture system, and they've started out as an alley cropping, so it's hay and apples, but it was an area that flooded regularly, and those they're cider apples specifically, and the apple trees don't like their roots inundated with water. Initially those trees didn't do well. Then they grafted the cider apples onto a Malus fusca, which is our native crab apple, and which is really great. And that's actually happening more and more in Western Washington. And so now you've got a rootstock that's well designed to be seasonally inundated. You've got a great crop. You can, with adequate protection, you can run livestock in there. So it really depends on your goals and objectives. But in Western Washington, as far as fruits and nuts, again, I've seen pears, apples, chestnuts, and hazelnuts, walnuts a few times. So those are all great trees that properly designed, a silvopasture system could be a good application of that.
Awesome. We have another question. Can adding trees to an existing pasture, one, reduce mud and soggy ground, and two, increase the grazing season, specifically for sheep?
Yep, this is a great question. So I'm going to put on my forest ecology hat. So let's say you've got a seasonally wet area and you want to add trees there. The common thinking there is, well, trees are like straws. They draw water out of the ground, and therefore they're going to dry that ground out. And I wish that was true all the time. But typically, at least in Western Washington, when are our fields and pastures wet is winter and it's springtime. And if you've got a deciduous tree, again, my favorite tree in the world is a white oak, so I'm just going to keep using that example. But our hazelnuts or chestnuts or any other deciduous tree, when that tree is not leafed out, it is not drawing up water from the landscape. For conifers, they're drawing up water regularly from the landscape, but they're not going to draw up sufficient amount of water from the soil hydrology to reduce the amount of muddy, soggy ground. However, they could increase the amount of muddy and soggy ground because they're holding in, they create a canopy, if you will, where something called evapotranspiration decreases underneath their canopy. So, if you're out taking your dog for a walk and you're tromping through the grass, maybe after a nice spring day and the sun's out, and you're noticing the grass is drying out, but as soon as you get underneath those trees, it's still kind of damp and wet. So trees can reduce the evapotranspiration underneath certain areas. But, and I know this wasn't a question, but I like talking about this stuff. The benefit, and this is something I mentioned in my talk, is for those of you that have livestock, those trees that increase or decrease the amount of evapotranspiration in your landscape, that means during the summer months, your forages are going to grow longer period compared to forages out in the sun, so that you can graze your livestock for a longer period of time. And that does increase the grazing season, specifically for sheep, or goats, or cattle. Probably horses too. I don't know anything about horses though.
Awesome. Okay, our next question is, I have an area where the native Doug firs have been wiped out by drought. I'm looking for replacement species that will integrate with a few head of cows.
Good question. I'd like to answer this quickly, but my experience suggests I got to hold back with the number one species that I would recommend, which you probably all know what it is because it's, again, my favorite tree. So if native Doug fir has been wiped out, one of the things I suggest is work with a forester. So we want to go back in time, if we will, jump back into our DeLorean for those of you that are in my age class. And we want to see what was there historically. Climate change may be a factor. It may not be a factor. It could have been how the land was managed. If Doug fir were historically the dominant species in the landscape, and your forester says, hey, this is still a good tree for you to grow, probably in lower density. That might have been part of the issue why your Doug fir got wiped out by drought, is either competition for soil water, so decreasing, or going to a more drought-tolerant species of tree, white oak. So great species, has high economic value for growing markets. It's a long-lived tree. So those are considerations. You might think of other trees that are, again, beneficial for your landscape and well-suited as well. That could be things like big leaf maple. So yeah, consult a forester. Maybe think about species that are more adapted to drier environments. Do a soil test. That would be my recommendation. Yeah.
Awesome. Okay, so next question is, what are considered the best management practices for tree establishment in pasture? This could include subsoiling, fungal inoculation, mulching, etc.
Great question. Yep. So first thing I would do is get some soil analysis. That could be your local conservation district and or NRCS, and come out and do a soil analysis. It's good to know what your soil texture is, your soil type, if you have a hard pan, and that will then drive what species of trees that you can establish. And so then again, this is all site selection stuff, and I know I've kind of beat this into you all, but just want to drive that nail into the coffin a little bit harder. So, and then working with your forester, select species of trees and or an orchard specialist, depending on your goals and objectives, and then thinking about what livestock are going to be interacting with those trees. So if you have a slow growing chestnut or hazelnut and you want to put in your sheep in, the same year you put it in your trees, think about the complexity of that and how to best manage that. We have some great examples in Washington, and we have some great agroforesters in the region that can help you work through those. And then finally, best to manage, just getting down to your question, what you asked, best management for establishing trees in a pasture. There's lots of technology around there, depending on what you want to do. You can put hardwood cloth on the ground to suppress competition between your forages and your tree, and planting your tree in there in the appropriate time of year. You may need to irrigate. You can also, if you don't want to use plastic in your landscape, I totally understand. Herbicide application, spot application prior to emergence of your forages, and or wood chipping. Wood chipping, I say last because it can have the most complexity. A lot of voles in Western Washington like to girdle trees, and they like to live in those wood chips. So use sparingly. But the best thing is monitoring and management. It's going out there again, being the fertilizer on the ground, your boots, and watching your trees, and watching for competition of forages, watching out for pests and pathogens, whatever those may be, and just monitoring and adapting your system accordingly. That could mean weed whacking around the tree, depending on your scale. It could mean brush hogging, or getting a flail mower through there. And that comes to your establishment of your trees, how wide your rows are, or the spacing between the trees. So something to consider there too. So, but I'm not sure if I can answer that one specifically, because there's a lot of site-specific treatments that may or may not apply. But broadly, those are some BMPs that I would suggest.
That sounds great. We don't have any more questions in the chat, but I'll leave the floor open to you in case there are any more that do come up.
There is one
Yep.
about ponderosa pine being an issue with cattle toxicity, and the person was asking if Sitka spruce might be better.
That's a good question. I don't know the answer, but I will find it and I will get it to Paul or Katie, and we'll let you know. That's a very good question. I'm not sure.
Yeah, so it's specifically the Fort Lewis. They are trying to restore the ponderosa pine there. So this question was about that
Right.
particular species.
And just a little bit more on ponderosa pine. Again, it's only toxic to pregnant livestock, and specifically cattle. And the toxins reside predominantly in green needles. And so one of my landowners that I worked with in graduate school, she and her father ran 1,000 head of cattle through only ponderosa pine. And it was a cow calf operation. And maybe once every 5 to 10 years, they had a calf die because of that toxicity. And that just came down to management. So, they pruned up the trees, the limbs, so that the cows had no access to those green needles. Windy events, they moved the cows out to the pasture and kept them away from the trees, so that when needles did fall, they dry out, desiccate, and the compounds in there would decrease. And then they monitored their livestock. When the cows were in there in the silvopasture, it was after calving season. So simple solutions there to prevent that. I'm not saying that you can't graze a cow calf operation in ponderosa pine. Just adds a little bit more complexity. So yeah, good questions. I see Chris's question about the native Doug firs wiped out. Oh, wait, nope, that's not it. Sorry, I was looking higher up. But I'll look into the Sitka spruce. It's a good question. I don't know the answer to that. Beautiful tree. Highly suggested. Love it.
All right. Well, if there are no more questions, and it is 8:07, so I just want to say thank you so much to Mark for your fantastic presentation, and to all of you that were here tonight. We just give you big thanks, and I'll pass it over to Paul for a joke to wrap this up.
Yeah. Yeah, so just as a reminder, I've got a few fact sheets that I can email to you if you're interested. Just let me know. Again, thank you, Mark, as really educational. So now that it's getting late in the evening, I wanted to know what the mama cow said to her calf. It's pasture bedtime. So thank you for joining us, and we'll put this up on our website.
All right. Thank you all.
Thank you.
And I'm just seeing Diana's comment about getting the references mentioned in the presentation. I think, Paul, are you planning on sending a follow-up email?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. So
Yes.
there you go.
I'll just
Awesome.
send the stuff to everybody.
Perfect. All
All
right.
right.
Thanks all.
All right. Thank you.